December 17, 1944, 0800 hours. Bullingen, Belgium. SS Oberfuhrer Joachim Paper stood in the town square, observing his men as they refueled his tanks. They were using American tanks, American fuel, and American jerry cans being poured into German panzers at gunpoint while captured American soldiers worked the pumps. Paper commanded Kampfgruppe Paper, the spearhead formation of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandard Adolf Hitler. His unit consisted of 4,800 men and 117 tanks and assault guns. His assignment was straightforward: break through the American lines, push westward, reach the Meuse River, seize the bridges, and split the Allied forces in half. The German offensive had begun 30 hours earlier. Hitler had named it Operation Watch on the Rhine, the largest German assault on the Western Front since 1940. 3 armies, totaling 250,000 troops and 1,400 tanks and assault guns, were involved. Their objective was Antwerp, to isolate the British and Canadian armies, force the Americans to panic, collapse, and negotiate, and ultimately change the direction of the war. But a critical obstacle stood in their way: fuel. German High Command had allocated 5 million gallons of gasoline for the entire operation. Basic math showed the panzers required double that amount just to reach Antwerp. The planners were aware of this. Their solution was brutally simple: capture American fuel depots along the way, take whatever gasoline they needed, and keep advancing. Before the offensive began, Paper's divisional intelligence officer handed him a map. It marked American supply points, fuel storage sites, ammunition depots, and logistical hubs. The intelligence was solid. The Americans had stockpiles everywhere. The real question was whether the Germans could seize them before U.S. troops had time to destroy them. Bullingen was the first major test. Kampfgruppe Paper had taken control of the town at 0730 that morning. The American troops withdrew so quickly that they left everything untouched. The fuel depot remained intact, 50,000 gallons of gasoline. Enough to completely refuel Paper's spearhead and carry it farther west. American prisoners were working the pumps, their engines running as they filled the German machines. Paper ordered it that way. His own troops were completely worn down. They had been in continuous combat for 36 straight hours. Making the prisoners fuel their captors' tanks was efficient and, in Paper's view, psychologically degrading for them, which he found advantageous. The fuel transfer continued steadily. Paper watched as jerry cans were passed hand to hand. Each can held 5 gallons. 10 cans were required per tank. With roughly 100 tanks to refuel, that meant 5,000 gallons. The process would take hours Paper did not have. Every minute spent stationary gave the Americans more time to strengthen their defense. But without fuel, the panzers were nothing immobile steel hulks on tracks. Paper had already learned this lesson on the Eastern Front. Even the finest tank in existence was useless if its fuel tank was empty. In 1943, the Wehrmacht had lost more armored vehicles to fuel shortages than to Soviet attacks. Entire divisions had been stranded, tanks abandoned, defensive positions overrun, not due to enemy fire, but because the panzers simply could not move. Here in Belgium, the same crisis was unfolding. German logistics had collapsed entirely. The fuel assigned for the offensive remained stuck far behind the front. Traffic jams, bomb-damaged roads, and American fighter bombers attacking anything that moved during daylight meant the supply convoys simply weren't arriving. Without those trucks, Paper had no choice: seize American fuel or stop his advance. One of his officers, Hauptsturmführer Nowski, approached him. Nowski was Paper's personal adjutant and had served with him since the campaign in France. A dependable, competent officer. Nowski reported that the fuel situation was even worse than expected. The 50,000 gallons captured at Bullingen would carry the spearhead as far as Stavelot, maybe. After that, they would need more fuel. Paper already knew this. His intelligence map marked another depot in Stavelot, larger than the one in Bullingen. The Americans would likely defend it or destroy it, but in either case, Paper needed to reach it quickly. Refueling continued as Paper made his way through the captured supply depot. American material was stacked in neat rows everywhere: ammunition crates, medical kits, food rations, winter uniforms. Everything was orderly, clearly labeled, and abundant. He picked up a ration box, a small cardboard package coated in brown waterproofing. The label read, K-Ration, Meal, Combat, Individual, Breakfast Unit. Paper opened it. Inside he found a can of chopped ham and eggs, hard biscuits, a chocolate bar for cigarettes, instant coffee, sugar tablets, chewing gum, a wooden spoon, matches, toilet paper, and a can opener. Everything a soldier needed for one meal, packed into a box no larger than a book, weighing less than a pound, requiring no cooking and no field kitchen, just open and eat. Paper had commanded combat units since 1940. He knew exactly what German troops received as rations. The standard German field ration, when it arrived at all, required cooking. It came in bulk containers, demanded field kitchens, and the bread was hard. The meat ration was mostly fat. Quality had been declining since 1943. By late 1944, frontline soldiers considered themselves lucky if they received anything. Kampfgruppe paper had left Germany with only 3 days of rations. Those were long gone. His men were surviving on whatever they could scavenge, captured American food, supplies taken from Belgian civilians, even slaughtered horses. Paper examined the K-ration box again. The production date stamped on the bottom read, October 1944, barely 2 months old. The Americans were manufacturing these meals so quickly and in such volume that rations produced mere weeks earlier were already at the front lines. His adjutant, Nowski, returned. Paper handed him the K-ration. Nowski opened the can of ham and eggs and ate it cold. His expression shifted immediately, surprise, almost disbelief. The food was good. Better than anything German troops had eaten in months. He inspected the remaining items in the box, real coffee, real chocolate, American cigarettes, small luxuries, but luxuries all the same. Matches, toilet paper, gum paper remained silent as he did the math in his head. If every American soldier received 3 of these ration boxes per day, that meant 3 complete meals. If the United States had 10 million soldiers worldwide, that equaled 30 million individual meal units every day, 900 million per month. The industrial capability required to manufacture that quantity was almost unimaginable. Germany had never produced anything on such a scale. Since 1939, the entire German armaments industry had been committed to total war, building tanks, aircraft, and ammunition, yet it still couldn't supply enough food for its own troops. And here were the Americans, packaging individual meals inside waterproof cartons, including small luxuries like chewing gum. Nowski pointed out something else: the depot contained hundreds, possibly thousands, of these ration boxes. And this was only one supply dump in a single small town. How many depots did the Americans possess? How much food? How much of every kind of supply? Paper had fought the Soviets in the East. He had witnessed Soviet logistics, mass production, basic but effective, endless streams of trucks, factories deep in the Urals beyond German bombing range. The Soviets could replace their losses faster than Germany could inflict them. But even Soviet supply methods looked primitive next to this. The Soviets moved supplies in bulk. The Americans packaged everything in individualized units. The Soviets relied on quantity. The Americans relied on both quantity and quality. Every piece of equipment paper inspected showed deliberate engineering, waterproof wrapping, compact form, long shelf life. This wasn't battlefield improvisation. It was industrial foresight. SS Sturmbannführer Werner Pochk arrived. Pochk commanded what remained of the 1st SS Panzer Battalion. He had lost tanks during the advance and needed resupply. His battalion was almost out of fuel and ammunition. Paper informed him that fuel was already being distributed. Ammunition would be taken from captured American stores. They had discovered crates of US 75mm shells that could be fired from German guns. Take what you need. Keep moving. Pochk asked about food his troops hadn't eaten since the previous day. Paper pointed toward the pile of American K-rations. Take as many as necessary. Have the men eat now and pack extra. There was no way to know when they would find another chance to resupply. Pochk gathered several boxes and handed them out to his tank crews. The men opened them and began eating. Paper watched them, seasoned fighters, veterans of France and Russia, consuming American emergency field rations as if they were festival meals. Compared to what German soldiers were typically issued, they practically were. Refueling was completed at 0930. Paper gave the order to move out. The Kampfgruppe assembled into a marching column, tanks in front, half-tracks following, support vehicles at the rear. The line of vehicles stretched for several kilometers. Paper's command vehicle positioned itself near the head of the formation. The route led northwest toward Stavelot, about 14 kilometers away, maybe a 20-minute drive at full speed under ideal conditions. But the roads were far from ideal. The Americans had not concealed the depot. They made no effort to disguise it. The jerrycans were piled openly right along the road. Thousands of them, amounting to millions of gallons, sitting in plain view. But Piper's expectation of a fuel depot was based on how German depots normally appeared: large storage tanks, permanent structures, parked vehicles, and obvious infrastructure. In contrast, the American depot was nothing more than rows of jerrycans lined up and ready. No sentries, no vehicles, no buildings, just fuel stored in mobile containers that could be transported instantly wherever required. Piper drove past, searching for something that resembled a typical depot. He never found it, because he was expecting the wrong kind of setup. After the war, an American historian named Major Ken Heckler interviewed Piper. Heckler explained that the depot, holding 3 million gallons, had been only 300 yards from Piper's route. Piper simply shrugged. He said he assumed the fuel would be stored in the town squares, like what he had seen at Bulingen. When he failed to locate it in Stavelot, he concluded the Americans must have relocated the supply. That single missed depot altered the entire course of events. With 3 million gallons available, Piper could have refueled his entire Kampfgruppe repeatedly. He could have supplied other German formations as well. The offensive could have continued. The critical fuel shortage that eventually halted the German advance would never have occurred. But Piper never discovered the depot. And without fuel, the advance was destined to fail. December 21, 1944, Stoumont, Belgium. Major Hal McCown crouched in a basement, listening to German armor tightening its grip around his location. McCown commanded the 2nd Battalion, 119th Infantry Regiment of the 30th Infantry Division. His battalion had been resisting Piper's Kampfgruppe for 3 days. Now they had been entirely cut off. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. German tanks were pushing in from every direction. American defensive lines were collapsing. McCown's radio operator reported that German troops had broken through to the south. The battalion was fully encircled. At 14:30 hours, German infantry assaulted McCown's command post. A brief exchange of fire erupted, leaving 1 American dead. McCown and several members of his staff were taken prisoner. German soldiers searched them for weapons and intelligence materials, seizing personal items such as watches, cigarettes, anything of worth. McCown was transported to a stone house on the outskirts of Stoumont, Piper's command post. The building showed heavy damage, shattered windows and walls scarred by gunfire. Inside, German officers pored over maps and coordinated their defensive positions, because by December 21, Piper's advance had reached its end. His Kampfgruppe was trapped. They had no fuel, no ammunition, no supplies, no path forward, and no path back. Piper stood near a map table, tall, lean, 30 years old, with sharp, aristocratic features and fluent English. When he saw McCown, he approached him. They held equivalent ranks, 2 battalion commanders, 1 German and 1 American, both seasoned professionals. Piper introduced himself and asked for McCown's name, unit, and role. McCown provided only what was permitted under the Geneva Convention. Name, rank, serial number, those were the only details McCown provided. Piper didn't push for anything more. He appeared less interested in formal interrogation and more eager simply to talk. That night, Piper and McCown spoke for 7 hours, from 2300 until 0500 the next morning. They sat together in a room filled with maps and discussed the war. Piper carried most of the conversation, while McCown mostly listened. Piper defended National Socialism, explained Germany's motives for fighting, and attempted to justify German conduct. McCown later remarked that rarely had he met someone who made such a strong impression in such a short time. Piper was intelligent, well-educated, articulate, and absolutely convinced that Germany would ultimately triumph even though he was surrounded, out of fuel, and watching his Kampfgruppe fall apart. Piper still believed victory was certain. McCown spent 3 days with Kampfgruppe paper. During that time, he observed everything: German supply levels, troop morale, equipment quality, food availability, medical conditions. He committed it all to memory because he knew the information could prove valuable. What he witnessed contradicted nearly everything Piper had claimed. Piper insisted Germany was winning, but the reality in front of McCown showed Germany was losing. German soldiers looked worn down. They had been fighting continuously for 5 days with almost no rest. Many of them wore pieces of American uniforms, knitted hats, gloves, sweaters, overshoes, even overcoats. They used captured American clothing because their own logistics system couldn't provide adequate winter equipment. Although the men appeared reasonably healthy, no starvation, no severe malnourishment, they clearly weren't eating well. German rations were extremely limited. Most soldiers were eating captured American food, K-Rations, C-Rations, 10-in-1 rations, whatever they could gather from overrun American supply points. McCown watched German troops open American ration packages. They examined each item with the excitement of children opening gifts. Chocolate, real coffee, cigarettes, small comforts that American soldiers considered ordinary but which German troops had not seen in months. One German showed McCown a can of ham from an American K-ration, saying it was superior to anything issued by the Wehrmacht. German canned meat, he explained, was mostly fat and gristle, needed cooking, and tasted unpleasant. The American ham, by contrast, was real preserved meat and could be eaten cold. The soldier commented, if Germany could make rations like this, the war would be different. McCown didn't respond, he was a prisoner, and debate was pointless, but he understood the man's point. If Germany had the capability to produce rations of American quality, they would have done so. The fact that they couldn't meant they lacked the industrial capacity. And if they didn't possess the ability to produce adequate food, they also lacked the capacity to manufacture everything else necessary for modern war. German medical supplies were desperately insufficient. The aid station in Stumont had no morphine and no sulfa drugs. Bandages were being washed and reused. Wounded German soldiers screamed during treatment because there were no painkillers available. McCown witnessed amputations carried out with almost no anesthesia. Men bit down on leather straps held tightly by their comrades while surgeons sawed through bone while the patients remained conscious. By American standards, this would have been considered barbaric. In American field hospitals, wounded soldiers had access to morphine, sulfa drugs, proper bandages, sterile instruments, and professional medical care. Injured soldiers received pain management, infection prevention through antibiotics, and competent treatment. The Germans, by contrast, were improvising with insufficient supplies, doing the best they could, but their best fell far short of American medical standards. On December 22, the Luftwaffe attempted an aerial resupply for Kampfgruppe paper. 6 aircraft flew at low altitude, dropping supply canisters by parachute. The intended drop zone was supposed to be within German-controlled territory. Most of the containers missed their target entirely, landing outside German lines. American forces recovered them. German soldiers could only watch as their supply crates fell 200 yards away into enemy hands, completely out of reach. The airdrop was a total failure. Paper's forces were now entirely cut off, surrounded by American units, with no fuel, no ammunition, dwindling food, no medical supplies, no means to evacuate the wounded, 170 American prisoners under their control, and hundreds of German casualties. The situation was critical and unsustainable. On December 23, Paper convened a meeting with his senior officers, and McCown was present. He observed as the German commanders weighed their options. Every possible choice was catastrophic. They could not advance, there was no fuel. They could not hold their positions indefinitely, ammunition was depleted. Retreating with vehicles was impossible, again, no fuel. The only remaining option was to abandon everything: tanks, half-tracks, vehicles, wounded soldiers who could not walk, and even the American prisoners they were holding. Paper made the decision: destroy the vehicles, leave the wounded with the American medical supplies, release the prisoners, and march on foot through the forest to try to reach German lines. It was the only choice that offered any chance of survival for his men. The breakout commenced at 0200 hours on December 24. 800 German soldiers moved silently through darkness, snow, and dense forest. They carried no vehicles or heavy weapons, only small arms and whatever equipment each man could carry. During the chaos, McCown managed to escape. He reached American lines on December 25 and immediately filed a comprehensive after-action report, detailing everything he had witnessed: German supply shortages, equipment conditions, morale, food availability, and medical care. The report was thorough and accurate. Later, in June 1946, McCown appeared as a defense witness at the Malmedy trial. He testified that Paper's men had treated him correctly according to the Geneva Convention. He described the dire conditions behind German lines, the logistical failures, the desperation, and the professionalism of German soldiers operating with severely limited resources. McCown emphasized one key point: the German defeat at Stumont was not due to American tactical superiority. They were defeated because they ran completely out of essential supplies, fuel, ammunition, food, medical provisions, everything necessary to maintain an army in the field. The Wehrmacht had become an 80-day army that could no longer sustain itself in combat. Without logistics, there was no possibility of victory. Paper was forced to abandon 7 Tiger II tanks at La, along with 50 medium tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 135 additional vehicles. Every single machine was immobilized because their fuel tanks were empty. Some of the most technologically advanced armored vehicles in the world were left behind, rendered useless. These tanks were intact, fully functional, and even loaded with ammunition, yet without gasoline, they were nothing more than stationary metal sculptures. Later, Belgian civilians recovered many of these vehicles, some were preserved in museums. Visitors often asked why the Germans had abandoned them, and the answer was always the same: no fuel. The vehicles could not move, and the crews could not remain, so they were left behind. January 1945. Prisoner of war camp in France. General Oberst Otto von Manschufel sat in an interrogation room, answering questions from American intelligence officers. Manschufel had commanded the 5th Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive. He was a professional soldier, a career officer, and a veteran of the Eastern Front. From the very beginning, he had opposed Hitler's plan for the Ardennes. The American interrogators asked detailed questions. What were Germany's objectives? What resources had been allocated? What went wrong? Manschufel responded honestly. He considered the war lost, there was no reason to lie. His answers would later become part of foreign military studies, official records, and historical accounts. Manschufel explained that he and Field Marshal Model had argued for a limited offensive with smaller, realistic objectives. Hitler, however, demanded Antwerp, crossing the Meuse River, splitting the Allied armies, and forcing negotiations. Strategically, Hitler's plan was impossible given the resources available. The fuel allocation alone made success unattainable: 5 million gallons for 3 armies, 1,400 tanks, and thousands of vehicles. Basic arithmetic revealed it was nowhere near sufficient. The plan relied entirely on the assumption that the Germans could capture American fuel depots along the way. That assumption was a gamble. What if the Americans destroyed the depots? What if the depots could not be located? What if they were successfully defended? All 3 scenarios occurred. Some depots were destroyed. Some could not be found. Some were heavily defended. The fuel crisis began immediately and never ceased. Manschufel reported that his tank units were already desperate for fuel as early as December 19, the second day of the offensive. Supply trucks were not reaching the front, and captured fuel was insufficient. The entire offensive ground to a halt as tanks sat idle, waiting for gasoline that never arrived. When asked by American interrogators about German logistics in general, Manschufel was candid: the entire system had collapsed. This failure was not isolated to the Ardennes, it reflected the broader collapse of German logistics. Since 1943, and perhaps even earlier, the Eastern Front had completely devastated German logistics. The distances were immense, the roads were in poor condition, and Soviet resistance was relentless. German trucks broke down faster than they could be repaired, while railways were constantly targeted and destroyed. The Wehrmacht increasingly depended on horses to move supplies, hundreds of thousands of animals pulling wagons, much like in 1870. By late 1944, certain German divisions had more horses than entire German divisions had during World War I. Mechanized warfare was being conducted with horse-drawn logistics. This contradiction proved fatal. Tanks could move far faster than the horses supplying them. Panzer units could advance 20 kilometers in a single hour, while supply wagons required an entire day to cover the same distance. Combat units frequently outran their logistics, then halted, immobilized, waiting for supplies that either arrived too late or never arrived at all. Reliance on horses brought additional complications. Each horse required approximately 20 pounds of fodder per day. A division with 5,000 horses needed roughly 50 tons of feed daily just to maintain its logistics system. That feed had to be transported over roads already congested with military traffic. Horses also perished due to exhaustion, air attacks, or inadequate nutrition. Dead horses blocked the roads, requiring disposal or burial, further slowing operations. American logistics, in contrast, relied entirely on trucks. Trucks did not require daily feeding. They could remain idle without consuming resources, moved faster, carried heavier loads, and needed fewer personnel for maintenance than horse-drawn wagons. The American truck fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands, all standardized, using interchangeable parts, and supported by a massive supply chain for spare components. Strategic bombing by the Allies only worsened German problems. Every rail junction was a target, every bridge was destroyed, and every road was strafed by fighter bombers. German logistics units were forced to move only at night. Daylight movement was essentially a death sentence from air attacks. American P-47s and P-51s struck anything that moved, supply columns were burned, fuel trucks destroyed, and food convoys decimated. German production could not replace these losses. Factories were bombed, raw materials were scarce, and skilled workers had been conscripted into combat units. The industrial base was collapsing. Even what factories could produce often failed to reach the front due to destroyed transportation networks. Manchufel contrasted this with American logistics. The United States maintained secure supply lines, with factories located thousands of miles from the front lines, safe from bombing, producing war materials at a pace Germany could never match. Ships continuously crossed the Atlantic, delivering essential supplies. The port of Antwerp alone handled more tonnage each month than all German ports combined. American supply depots were distributed everywhere, ensuring that Allied forces never lacked for food, fuel, or ammunition. Fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, everything was organized, abundant, and redundant. The existence of multiple depots meant that losing one did not critically affect operations. Standardized containers allowed soldiers to handle supplies without specialized training. Overproduction ensured that waste was acceptable if it accelerated the distribution process. German logistics had no surplus capacity. Every supply depot was vital. Every fuel truck was irreplaceable. Every ration was carefully accounted for. The Wehrmacht constantly operated on the brink of collapse. A single disruption triggered a crisis. 2 disruptions spelled disaster. American officers asked Manchufel when he realized Germany would lose the war. He said he knew in 1943, after the Battle of Kursk. German forces could still win individual battles, but winning battles alone was insufficient. Germany needed to win the war itself, which required resources it did not possess: industrial capacity, oil, food, manpower, and time. The Americans had all of these advantages: effectively unlimited industrial output, secure oil supplies from Texas and the Middle East, agricultural production capable of sustaining both military and civilian populations, and a population of 130 million with time to mobilize and deploy it. Germany had already lost the resource war before the shooting war had concluded. Once the United States entered the conflict, German defeat became inevitable, not immediate, not easy, but mathematically certain. The calculations were simple. America could produce more tanks, planes, ammunition, food, and everything else than Germany could destroy. Eventually, American material superiority would crush German resistance. The Ardennes offensive represented a final desperate gamble, used the last strategic reserves to achieve a single decisive victory and force the Allies to negotiate. Hitler believed that willpower and courage could overcome material shortages. Manchufel knew better. Bravery and determination mattered, but logistics mattered more. An army without supplies cannot fight effectively, no matter how courageous its soldiers are. The offensive failed catastrophically. German losses were staggering: 600 tanks destroyed or abandoned, 34,000 killed, and 60,000 wounded or missing. The Wehrmacht's last mobile reserves were depleted. After the Ardennes, Germany had no option but retreat: no more offensives, no more grand strategic plans, only delaying actions, fighting to slow the inevitable end. Manchufel was tasked with producing detailed reports on the Ardennes offensive, covering the 5th Panzer Army's operations, planning, execution, and lessons learned. He wrote 148 pages initially, then another 161 pages. These became the Foreign Military Studies manuscripts B-151 and B-151A, professional military analyses offering balanced assessments, crediting American performance, and providing honest evaluations of German failures. His tone was clinical, detached, and professional. He criticized German shortcomings, acknowledged Allied successes, offered no excuses, no propaganda, just precise, factual analysis. This is what occurred. This is why it occurred. These were the errors. These were the outcomes. Other German generals were far less candid in their post-war accounts. They blamed Hitler. They blamed the weather. They blamed misfortune. They blamed everything except the core problem. Germany lacked the industrial and logistical capacity to sustain modern warfare against adversaries with superior resources. Manschufel did not offer excuses. He stated the facts. Germany was defeated because it was outproduced, outsupplied, and undersustained. In December 1944, the German army was still capable of tactical brilliance, but tactical skill alone, without strategic resources, inevitably led to defeat. The interrogation ended. Manschufel was returned to the prisoner compound. He would spend the next year in American custody, then be released, return to Germany, and lead a long post-war life. In 1968, he lectured at West Point. He gave interviews for documentaries. He remained a professional soldier, providing honest assessments until his death. His legacy was his integrity. Unlike many German generals who rewrote history to justify failures, Manschufel told the truth. The Ardennes offensive failed because of logistics. The war was lost because of industrial capacity. No amount of tactical skill could overcome material deficiency. February 6, 1940, Nuremberg, Germany. SS Oberstgruppenführer Joseph Dietrich sat in a cell awaiting his trial. Dietrich had commanded the 6th SS Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive. A former butcher in Hitler's bodyguard, he had been promoted far beyond his competence. An American psychiatrist named Leon Goldens interviewed Dietrich. Goldens was documenting the psychological condition of Nazi war criminals. On February 28, he spoke with Dietrich. Their discussion covered multiple topics: the war, National Socialism, the offensive's failure. At one point, Dietrich made a darkly sardonic comment about his army. He said, "We call ourselves the 6th Panzer Army because we only have 6 panzers left." Gallows humor, grim humor, but accurate. The offensive had decimated his forces. Losses were catastrophic. Equipment was destroyed, soldiers were dead or captured, and what remained barely qualified as an operational military unit. Dietrich was not a strategic thinker. Hermann Göring later remarked of him, "He is decent but stupid." He could at most command a division. Hitler gave him an army. The results were predictable. The 6th Panzer Army had been intended to lead the main thrust. Instead, it immediately bogged down. Poor planning, traffic jams, fuel shortages, and fierce American resistance compounded the problem. Dietrich's forces had been allocated fuel for 90 to 100 miles of movement. The distance to Antwerp was 140 miles. Even if everything had gone perfectly, the fuel allotment was inadequate. The plan explicitly relied on capturing American fuel depots. Without the captured fuel, the offensive could not succeed. The entire operation hinged on seizing enemy supplies. That reliance exposed the complete collapse of German logistics. Military operations cannot be planned around seizing enemy resources. It is desperation masquerading as strategy. Professional officers like Manschufel understood this reality. Political appointees like Dietrich did not. Goldens asked Dietrich about why the offensive had failed. Dietrich blamed everything except logistics. He blamed American air power. He blamed the weather. He blamed the terrain. He blamed Hitler for setting unrealistic objectives. All of these criticisms had validity, yet he never acknowledged that his army ran out of fuel because German logistics could not sustain the offensive. After the war, analyses conducted by both American and German military historians reached the same conclusion. The Ardennes offensive failed primarily due to logistical shortcomings. Fuel shortages halted the advance. Limited ammunition and restricted artillery support reduced soldier effectiveness. Food shortages undermined endurance. Medical supply deficiencies meant wounded soldiers died who might have otherwise survived. German tactical performance was often impressive. Individual units fought effectively. Officers made sound decisions with the resources they had. Soldiers displayed courage and skill. Yet, even the best tactics cannot compensate for logistical failure. An army without fuel cannot move forward. An army without ammunition cannot attack. An army without food cannot maintain operations. The Americans won the Battle of the Bulge not primarily through superior tactics, but through superior logistics. Reinforcements arrived faster than the Germans could advance. Defensive positions were adequately supplied. Losses were replenished from reserves. Operations continued through winter conditions that crippled German capabilities. By December 1944, American logistics were a mature system. 5 years of development, extensive infrastructure, dedicated logistics units, specialized vehicles, standardized procedures, and strategically located supply depots across Europe ensured efficiency. Transportation networks moved supplies from American factories to frontline positions within weeks. April 1945, American Interrogation Center, Germany. Joachim Paper sat across from American interrogators, answering questions about Kampfgruppe operations. The war was coming to an end. Germany was collapsing. Paper would soon face war crimes charges for the Malmedy massacre. For now, however, the Americans sought information about tactical operations. Paper described the offensive in detail: planning, execution, problems encountered, decisions made. He was cooperative and professional. Answers were accurate, factual, delivered with the straightforwardness of one soldier to another. There was no defiance, no evasion, just honest reporting. The Americans asked about fuel. When did your supplies run out? Where did you refuel? Which depots did you capture? Paper explained the fuel crisis. Bulingen provided 50,000 gallons, enough to reach Stavelot. But at Stavelot, he found no major fuel depot. Only small amounts were scattered along the roads, far from sufficient. Paper pressed on westward with minimal fuel. He reached Stum and ran entirely dry. An American officer asked whether Paper was aware of the depot at Stavelot, 3 million gallons, just 800 feet from his route. Paper said he did not know. The interrogator showed him a map, pointed to the depot's location, and explained that thousands of jerrycans were stacked along that road, right there. Paper had passed within 300 yards. He studied the map for a long moment, then shrugged, gave a slight smile, and said in English, "I am sorry." The interrogator asked why he had missed it. Paper explained that he had expected fuel to be concentrated in the town, piled in the square like at Bulingen. When he did not find it there, he assumed the Americans had removed it. He had never thought to look for jerrycans stacked along a roadside. The interrogator took notes. Paper continued describing subsequent operations: the advance to Stoumont, the encirclement, the decision to break out on foot, the abandonment of all vehicles, and the retreat through the forest back to German lines. He never expressed regret about the missed depot, no emotion, no frustration, just a tactical error explained in professional terms. Opportunities are missed in war. You move on. But that missed opportunity altered the course of the battle. With 3 million gallons, Kampfgruppe Paper could have refueled multiple times, continued advancing, reached the Meuse River, and possibly achieved the breakthrough that the offensive aimed for. Or maybe not. Even with unlimited fuel, Paper still faced American resistance, American air power once the weather cleared, and reinforcements moving faster than he could advance. Logistics was critical, but it was not everything. Fuel alone would not have guaranteed victory, but it would have changed the outcome. The Germans would have advanced further, inflicted more casualties, captured more territory, and prolonged the battle. The strategic situation could have been very different, all because Paper drove past 3 million gallons of gasoline without noticing it. The depot had been there, visible, accessible, completely undefended. He passed within 300 yards and missed it entirely because he was searching for something that resembled a German-style depot: organized infrastructure, buildings, guards. The American depot, by contrast, was just fuel stacked, ready and waiting. No buildings, no guards, no formal structure, just fuel in place where it was needed. That was American logistics: simple, efficient, abundant, with no wasted effort on unnecessary infrastructure. Soldiers would figure out how to use the supplies. German logistics, on the other hand, was more complex: formal structures, designated supply points, official procedures. The system worked when everything functioned properly, but it was fragile. Disrupt one part, and the whole system collapsed. American logistics, in contrast, was resilient, redundant, and flexible. Having multiple depots meant that losing one was not critical. Standardized containers allowed soldiers to manage supplies without special training. High-volume production meant that some waste was acceptable if it sped up distribution. These were fundamental differences in methodology. German logistics focused on control and efficiency, whereas American logistics prioritized abundance and speed. Over the course of a prolonged conflict, the American approach prevailed. The interrogation concluded. Paper was returned to confinement. He would later face trial, conviction, a prison sentence, eventual release, and a long post-war life. He died in France in 1976 under mysterious circumstances. His military career was thoroughly documented, his tactical decisions analyzed, and both his failures and successes recorded. The missed fuel depot at Stavelot remained his most consequential tactical error, not a moral failing, not a war crime, but a miscalculation. He looked in the wrong place, assumed the wrong situation, and missed an opportunity that could have altered the outcome of the battle. That single error symbolized the broader German failure. The Wehrmacht was searching for something that did not exist. They expected American logistics to function like German logistics, concentrated depots, formal structures, predictable patterns. But American logistics operated differently, distributed, flexible, and abundant. The K-Ration exemplified that system. It was not the sole reason America won, but it represented why America won. In 1944 alone, 105 million K-Rations were produced, each providing 2,830 calories across 3 individually packaged meals, manufactured safely in American factories far from bombing, shipped across the Atlantic, and delivered to soldiers fighting simultaneously on multiple continents. German soldiers opened these boxes and saw food. What they should have recognized, however, was the industrial capacity, transportation networks, and economic system capable of producing millions of meal packages each month and delivering them wherever needed. The small luxuries, chocolate, cigarettes, chewing gum, demonstrated surplus production capability. America could afford non-essentials because their output was so abundant. By contrast, German rations in 1944 reflected a failing system, inadequate nutrition, poor quality, inconsistent distribution, and reliance on field kitchens that could not always operate. Everything highlighted resource scarcity and industrial strain. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Wehrmacht soldiers were starving. Rations had collapsed, and supply systems had disintegrated. Many German prisoners of war gained weight while in American captivity, receiving regular meals for the first time in months. One German POW recalled, "When I was captured, I weighed 128 pounds. After 2 years as an American prisoner of war, I weighed 185. I had gotten so fat you could no longer see my eyes." American prison camp rations were far superior to German combat rations. The Battle of the Bulge concluded in January 1945. German forces retreated to their original positions, while American troops launched counterattacks. By March, the Allies had crossed the Rhine River, and by April, they were surrounding Berlin. In May, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Ardennes offensive exhausted Germany's remaining strategic reserves without achieving its intended objectives. It delayed Allied advances by a few weeks and caused casualties, but it did not alter the war's ultimate outcome. The units committed to the Ardennes represented the finest Germany had left. After the offensive, those units were destroyed, dispersed, and incapable of sustained operations. During the same period, American forces grew stronger. Additional divisions arrived from the United States, along with more equipment and supplies, while the American logistics system continued functioning efficiently. Germany lost World War II because it could not sustain modern warfare against adversaries with superior industrial and logistical capacity. Strategic mistakes and tactical errors played a role, but the fundamental imbalance was economic. Both the United States and the Soviet Union possessed industrial economies capable of producing war material faster than Germany could destroy it. Germany could not match that output. That disparity determined the war's outcome. American logistical superiority extended well beyond rations. Vehicle production illustrates the gap. The United States produced 400,000 trucks during the war, while Germany produced only 140,000. American factories delivered 63,000 tanks, compared to 46,000 from Germany. German tanks required more maintenance, more fuel, and more spare parts, whereas American tanks were simpler, more reliable, and easier to maintain in field conditions. The difference was even greater in aircraft production. The United States built 300,000 military aircraft during the conflict, while Germany built only 120,000. American bombers struck German factories with impunity, while American fighters dominated the European skies. German aircraft production declined throughout 1944. Despite desperate efforts to increase output, Allied bombing destroyed factories faster than Germany could replace them. German soldiers fighting at the Battle of the Bulge were fully aware of this imbalance. They witnessed American equipment abandoned intact because retreating forces had no time to destroy it. They captured American supply depots containing more food and ammunition than they had seen in months. Many wore American uniforms because German logistics could not provide sufficient winter clothing. Every encounter with captured American supplies reinforced the same lesson: the enemy had everything, Germany had nothing. This knowledge influenced German combat effectiveness. Soldiers who recognize that their side is losing fight differently from those who believe victory is possible. German troops in December 1944 fought with courage, but bravery has its limits when you are cold, hungry, and aware that even if you win today's battle, tomorrow will bring more American soldiers equipped with more supplies. Meanwhile, American soldiers fought with the expectation of victory, confident in their material superiority and logistical support. American soldiers understood that their logistics system was reliable. They knew that if they were surrounded, supplies would be delivered by air. They knew that if their units suffered casualties, replacements would arrive promptly. They knew wounded soldiers would receive proper medical attention. This confidence allowed them to maintain resistance even in desperate situations. The Battle of the Bulge repeatedly demonstrated this. American units encircled at Bastogne received airdropped supplies. Forces engaged at Saint-Vith were reinforced. Wounded troops were evacuated to hospitals with adequate medical care. The logistics system operated effectively under pressure. In contrast, German logistics collapsed under the same stress. By January 1945, the disparity in logistics had become absolute. German units abandoned vehicles due to fuel shortages, while American units had fuel reserves in abundance. German soldiers scavenged food from civilians, whereas American troops enjoyed hot meals from field kitchens. German wounded suffered in aid stations without morphine, while American casualties received painkillers and antibiotics. The final months of the war confirmed what the Battle of the Bulge had already shown: Germany could not sustain military operations against an enemy with functioning logistics. As German supply lines disintegrated, entire units surrendered, not due to lack of courage or skill, but because they were deprived of food, fuel, ammunition, and hope. When American forces entered Germany in 1945, they encountered a country whose infrastructure had been devastated by strategic bombing. Factories lay in rubble, rail yards were cratered, and roads were impassable. The industrial base that had supported German military operations no longer existed. Meanwhile, American factories continued producing war material at full capacity. The economic war had already been decided long before the fighting ended. The K-Rations symbolized this reality in a tangible form that German soldiers could hold. A waterproof cardboard box containing 3 individually packaged meals, complete with luxuries such as chocolate and cigarettes. The manufacturing date indicated recent production. The sheer abundance was evident at every captured American supply depot. This was more than food, it was proof of an industrial capacity Germany never possessed and could no longer attain by 1944. Logistics determined the outcome of the war. Tactics, strategy, and leadership all mattered, but logistics formed the foundation for everything else. An army without sufficient supplies cannot execute tactics, no matter how skilled its soldiers are. It cannot implement strategy, no matter how brilliant its generals are. It cannot sustain combat operations, no matter how motivated its troops are. Germany lost World War II because it could not maintain modern warfare against opponents with superior industrial and logistical resources. The United States produced more of everything, delivered it faster, and sustained operations longer. The economic imbalance made the military outcome inevitable. The K-Ration did not win the war, but holding one in December 1944, German soldiers had in their hands the evidence of why they were losing.